Hey everyone, this is Yosef Siegel and welcome back to Back of the Beis. This week's episode is part 2 of the Oral Torah. Hope you enjoyed last week's episode, part 1. We're going to continue right where we left off last week, discussing the accurate transmission of the Oral Torah, and go into more discussions of why the Oral Torah wasn't written down in the first place, and how it applies and was prepared from its onset for all eras and all scenarios, even those that did not exist back in the time of Matan Torah. Make sure to check out the blog itself, backofthebeis.blogspot.com. Email us at backofthebeis@gmail.com. And without further ado, let's get right into part 2 of the Oral Torah. So another explanation that I've seen in terms of how we know that the Torah Sheba'al Peh was transmitted accurately, which is the formal way of asking your question, is there have always been thousands of Torah scrolls among the Jewish people. Other cultures and traditions have tried to limit the knowledge of their followers. Judaism has always been about as many people as possible to know as much as they can.
Right.
So if somebody was going to come at some point and change something in the Torah, you're dealing with, and that's, by the way, we all hope for the redemption very soon, but one of the advantages Amen. But one of the I was waiting for you to say something. I thought I was going to get a big one right away. You're spacing out over there. But one of the advantages of being in Gullus, of being in exile, is that we're all over the place. So if you go and mess up something in one corner of the world, the other three corners are still good. If somebody tries to change something in the Torah in a totally different area of the world, there's thousands and thousands of copies of the Torah all over the rest of the globe, right, which you're going to have to change too. That's impossible. It's impossible nowadays. It's even more impossible thousands of years ago.
Well, now it's on the internet.
So I'm saying it's impossible nowadays, yeah. But it's more likely now when you have access to the entire world. Right. You could theoretically change something globally, as opposed to 2,000 years ago when you had access to as long as you can walk in a day. That's the access that you had.
Or a very sketchy 2-week boat ride.
Right.
Very sketchy.
Very sketchy. There was no such thing as a non-sketchy boat ride.
I know, right? What a trip back in the day.
But that's that's another classic
trade in Italy. All right, I may never see you. Nowadays, it's like, yeah, I'll be back tonight.
That's so wonderful. Anyway,
yeah, I mean, I think another important point is that a lot of secular people harp on, which they don't understand that what they're saying is incorrect, is that the vast majority of the Oral Torah is not talking about morality. We don't learn out morality. It's laws. It's literal. It's right. Very technical, literal laws.
Is very about morality.
You could say that the laws are inherently moral because they're God's laws.
Right.
But we don't learn out moral.
Right. The written Torah is more
ethics.
About morality.
Right. The written Torah is more about morality, and it's flushed out in by many scholars in detail. Obviously, as what we consider the Oral Torah. Although it's interesting to note that the tractate Avos, right? The Father's tractate. The Father's tractate, is that how you'd say it?
Avos literally
called
translates as
Fathers.
Yeah.
It was codified and written down in the Mishnah.
I actually have a whole thing about that. How it's so interesting that Pirkei Avos is basically a Masechta about morality, but it's right in the middle of the most basic, day-to-day technical laws.
Right.
Whether it's property or criminal or any possession.
Property law,
property, all these things. So many, and it's right in the middle is the morality. So the famous answer is that if you're going to be involved in all these business dealings, you have to be moral at the same time.
Right.
But I like to look at Pirkei Avos, and you read it like a halacha book.
Oh, 100%.
That's how you have to look at it. It's like you have to do this. You have to be this. It's not just about being moral. These
are good ideas. These are right.
Yeah.
These are halachos.
Keep hitting the chair. Another point that I thought is important to bring up is because we keep saying how we know for sure that this has come down from Moshe, and we're talking about how you can't mess up the Oral Torah and stuff like that. So, or we just said the point of that there's no broken telephone when it comes to the Oral Torah. So the question is, okay, but what about the beginning of the Oral Torah? Because we explained that the Mishnah was written, and you see plenty of arguments within the Mishnah.
Right.
So if the whole thing was given from Moshe,
Why
then
are
at a
there
certain
arguments?
point, at a certain point, where did the arguments come from? If the whole thing, if we're confident that we don't have broken telephone, where did the arguments come from?
Right. That's a very good question.
Have you ever heard an answer?
Let me think for a minute. I know that I've heard. I'm trying to remember what it was though. I mean, obviously, there's the famous indiction. Is that a word? Which is Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim. That both opinions are true.
But before that, that's definitely a thing. That two
Which
opinions
needs
are both,
explanation,
as long
no
as
doubt.
they're used, they're makes right. So what does that mean? Because the Torah itself is acknowledging that we're going to have a difference of opinion.
Right.
But if Moshe gave us the law, then where did the argument start from?
Right.
So the explanation that I've always heard is that you don't see arguments in the Talmud about, again, we don't see arguments about what you're commanded to do and what you're not commanded to do. The closest thing we have to an argument about that is which mitzvahs are part of the 613 and which ones aren't.
Right.
But even if one opinion is that this is a mitzvah and this is not, that's still the one that's not is still a commandment. It's still something that you're obligated in doing. It's just a detail it's a subcategory of another commandment.
True.
So what are the arguments in Mishnayos? It's circumstantial arguments, meaning the circumstances that I find myself in, I now need to apply the laws that I know. Moshe didn't give over every single circumstance that would happen throughout life.
Well, clearly, because he didn't live in the age of...
He didn't live 1,000 years later. Whatever
Right.
technology they had 1,000 years later. Technology is developing much faster now than it did 100 years ago or
They
200
still
years ago.
presumably had different scenarios. You're saying that it's
Yeah. I mean, Moshe couldn't give over
situational.
every single scenario, right? He gave over. Right? So basically, as new and different circumstances arose, so now the different rabbis had to discuss how do we approach this situation, and through that's where the arguments come from. And that's where you say Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim, that all of these, even though they have differences of opinion, they're all the word of God, because basically everyone was trying to figure out the answer to the same question, and they were using the methods that have been set up to discern the message from the Torah, and they arrived at different conclusions. That's okay,
Right.
but we don't know which one to do. It's okay that they arrived at different conclusions. Our problem is that what are we supposed to do?
Right.
But it's still the words of God, because they followed everything they were supposed to do.
Which is why really the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch were such big deals through history, because it sort of laid out the bottom line in a very situational sense. Like in each situation, it laid out the bottom line.
Right. It was a game changer,
Yeah.
because that was the final thing.
Another thing I wanted to deal with, though, in terms of the Oral Torah is why can't I or anybody else come along and say, well, I disagree with what that rabbi said, and I want to interpret it this way. Once we're in the game of interpretation, what stops me from coming along and saying, well, I interpret these words to mean completely different things?
I guess that's all about Emunas Chachamim. That as Jews, we believe that the people who came before us had a more direct knowledge of how the Torah was meant to be learned. They couldn't know all the scenarios that we would find ourselves in because they didn't have the society that we have nowadays, but they did have a greater understanding of how the Torah was meant to be interpreted. So if they have a method, look, nowadays how many philosophical arguments and social arguments are there among Jews just because people say, no, the Torah is telling you to do this, and the other person says, no, the Torah is telling you to do this. So that still exists. The concept of that, the original interpretations of the Torah that we have, we believe as a people that we have decreased in the knowledge of how the Torah was meant to be used.
That's the direction you would take with that?
Emunas Chachamim. What would you say? Emunas
It's
Chachamim,
obviously
that's
a
the
good
basic
point.
thing.
I mean, it's I think it's the correct point in some senses, but I don't think that answer is so pleasing to some people.
I can understand why not, because these are people that died a long time ago, and in general society, we believe that the more knowledge that's... First of all, even in Torah, we believe that the more knowledge you have,
Right, so that's
the
the
greater explanation you can give. Right? So nowadays we have a lot more knowledge than they did back then, because we've expanded on what they've written. So there's no question that there's more knowledge nowadays, but I think it's about understanding the way the book was actually meant to be interpreted, not just in the circumstances that we find ourselves. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think I might be going in a slightly different direction, but it's a similar idea, though, which is that in the way I look at it is like, what stops me from saying, well, I disagree with so and so who wrote I can't do this or I have to do that, because I just I see the particular verse that he's using to tell me that I have to wake up at a certain time or whatever it is, and I just read the verse differently. So the thing that in my mind stops me or anyone else with any brain from just doing that at random is a little bit of humility, in the sense that you don't walk into you don't walk into Google one day in their head software engineer department and be like, oh hey, well I think you should write the code slightly differently. Like, have you been to college? Do you know anything about coding?
Right.
Like, you can't just walk, just like any other discipline, walk into a doctor's office and say, okay, well, I interpret such and such disease or such and such signs of differently. So I don't think I should take antibiotics. It's like, okay, you can say that, but how much knowledge do you have to back that up?
So I didn't think you were going in that direction, because that's obviously just stupid. Meaning somebody who has the chutzpah to come in and say that.
Well, that's what...
They're just an idiot. Like, no academic would.
So I'm pointing that in terms of, like, reform, conservative, open orthodox, these type of movements.
Yeah.
I mean, you said it pretty well right there. It's just obviously stupid.
Saying academically, that's not good academics. Forget Torah.
It's just, right, that's
not
my
academically
point.
honest.
It's not
I thought you were talking about
honest.
somebody who has gone through... Let's talk about someone who's a serious academic, right? And goes through the system, right? And comes to the conclusion that the verse was learned out wrong, or it could be learned out differently. So I would say two things. The first thing I would say is that, as we spoke about...
Precedent is the... Just like in any other discipline, we're in any other, like, let's say, law department of law, you use precedent.
Yeah, but you could take precedent all the way back, and we could rewrite laws nowadays in regular secular courts. You can rewrite a law saying that it was not fair when it was originally written. So that's what they did with slavery.
Right.
They just said, they changed it. They said slavery is immoral, and
Roe v. Wade
got rid of it. But what about...
Refer to Ben Shapiro for my personal opinion on Roe v. Wade.
But what I would say is that if you're a serious academic and you come out with the conclusion that the original scholars of the Talmud got the wrong law from the wrong verse, I would say that if you really believe...
Oh, you're saying
Moshe,
you're going that direction. Okay, so
say someone who's totally academically honest, right? So I would say that no, if you believe in Moshe and you believe that this all came from Moshe, that's the ultimate decider. The ultimate decider is that you have to believe in Moshe, which we talked about on our Revelation episode, which again is either before or after this one. We discussed why we believe that.
Based on Revelation, it's either before or after.
But the second thing I would say, and we touched on this at the beginning, and it's good to get into this now, if you study Talmud, it's incredibly complex and incredibly smart. And it's obviously we want as many people as possible to learn Talmud in the Jewish people, but it's sometimes lost on the regular people out there, the people who are not necessarily, forget about if they're smart, if they're not smart, but they're not academics. They don't know how to really look at something and evaluate it in an academic way. If the real people who dedicate their lives to the study of the Talmud, it never ends. And we have the books to prove it. Like we have the books and the yeshivas to prove it that it never ends. So I find it really hard to believe that somebody could come up with a legitimate case, right, of something that's been, unless either somebody's already asked the question over the past 3,000 years, right, and it's written down, it's documented, or you come up with an explanation, somebody will shoot you down right away.
Right.
At a certain point, you're just gonna, because again, we're talking about a book which has been dissected minutely for 3,000 years.
Right. By the greatest minds that the Jews have had to
Yeah,
offer.
and as we know, the Jews have the best minds in the world, and it's not just nowadays.
It's a bold statement.
Hey, look.
We're in the back of the base now.
The 21st century was shaped by Jews. You have Einstein, you have
Communism,
Freud, you have Marx, all shaped by Jews. The world was shaped by Jews.
Capitalism's always been a Jewish thing.
From who?
Just Jews say, leave me alone in my business dealings. Don't tax me and leave me alone to do my business.
Look, and nowadays, Intel, processing chips, military technology, it's all from the Jews.
Drones. AI. I don't know if AI was originally discovered or brought out by Jewish minds, but why not? We'll throw it in there.
Yeah, we have no problem taking credit for stuff.
Right.
But yeah, so meaning like those are the two things. Those are the two things I would
think maybe just I'm thinking now to make the point of the faith in the Chachamim, Munas Chachamim, a little bit more like palatable, is if you think about it practically speaking, if Har Sinai was right, if the giving of the Torah or the subsequent 40 years of closeness to actually being with the teacher who got the original information, the closer you are to that, the better off you are in terms of having the
accuracy.
Of accuracy. So it's like,
but not just what's written, how you understand it, how it's meant to be understood.
Right. Okay. True. Too. Yeah, I'm saying that in the sense that like we have precepts that that. Well, I'll explain the terms in a second, but like Amoraim can't argue on Tanaim, Rishonim can't argue on Amoraim, Achronim can't argue on Rishonim.
Each subsequent generation is not allowed to argue on the previous one.
Right. And as we move further and further on, it's like let's say I became a massive scholar.
When we say, just to be clear, sorry to interrupt, but just to be clear, when we say generation, we don't mean like you can't argue on your parents. We mean a period of time. We're talking about an era. We're talking about different eras. Every subsequent era cannot argue on a previous era.
My point is that for instance, let's say you would have someone nowadays who would come and say, like a scholar, a smart academic who was studying Judaism and whatnot, and let's say he wanted to start some new version of a reform movement, and he would say, "Oh, I disagree with Rambam and this places. Like, you can't do that." Meaning, no one's going to take you seriously.
That's something we've set up.
No, 100%. I'm saying no one's going to take you seriously if you do that. But why not? What stops somebody from arguing on those generations?
Right.
The basic idea that the closer you were to the source of this information, the more accurate it's going to be.
Right.
Right. Like, you wouldn't necessarily trust the Rishonim's generation on quantum mechanics because they're very far in the other direction from that knowledge.
Right.
You would trust the closest person you had to that information.
Right. Which is another important point, which is not for now, but just in terms of what we associate knowledge with the Tanaim and Amoraim.
So what we come to, though, is that obviously the oral tradition is, in some senses, vastly more important to us as a people and to us as a organized religion, if you will.
Yeah.
Faith in it, trusting in it, but most importantly, not faith in it so much as getting involved in it, looking into it yourself, learning it, tripping out to it.
That's all where it is. That's where it's at. It's all over there. It's all, I'm just saying stuff.
I'm just saying
I'm just stopping
the flow of this conversation.
Well, you want to stop now, or
no, not necessarily, but like
okay.
I don't know.
No, because I'd say we have two more things we could talk about. We still have to talk about why it wasn't written down.
True.
And then you have to speak out your question that we've talked about, and everything that we've already said, we'll answer.
We'll answer that.
Yeah,
that's why I wasn't even going there.
Right, but I just want to speak it out because I want to. You have to, like say it, and then we could say, okay, we've just told you why that's not true.
Right.
So the question we've been hinting at the entire time, and we haven't talked about yet, is so why wasn't it just written down?
Right.
Meaning there's obviously not a law against all Torah being written down because we have something called the written Torah.
Right.
So why wasn't the oral Torah written down? So I have in my book I have a couple answers to it. It basically falls into a couple of categories. The first one is that this is an interesting thing. Torah is not just an academic exercise, right? And it's not just an educational system and stuff like that. It's a lifestyle.
Not a science.
It's a lifestyle.
Right.
You have to live in a Torah way. And
There's got to be a song about that.
Live in the Torah way?
Yeah.
I'm sure Country Yossi did something or something like
right.
that. So what that means is that you can't learn everything from a book. You can read a book and then at a certain stage you have to see it in practice. So what the Oral Torah does is that it forces you, right, to be listening to somebody. Meaning, if you're just reading a book, like they didn't have pictures in those days. And even with pictures, there's only so much you can accomplish. But if someone's sitting there in front of you saying, "Okay, this is what you do and this is what you can't do," it's much more real. It forces you to have human interaction, right, which develops into discussion, like what we're doing now. It develops into feedback and questions, meaning that a person will be able to understand more if somebody's telling it to them, because as opposed to just reading it from a book, you can't ask questions to a book, but you can ask questions to a man. And the final part of that idea is that you have to have a person who's suitable to teach you the laws, right? And what that does is that you now have people who will seek out teachers in order to learn the Torah because they can't read it from a book. So that's really the best. I think that's the best way of looking at the Oral Torah. It demands you to actually look at the Torah in real life and get actual hands-on experience, discussion, feedback, be able to ask questions, etc. And if it's written at a certain point, people will just be like, "Okay, I have the book. I don't need to go look for somebody."
Right.
But if you don't have the book, you will have to look for somebody.
In a sense, it makes it much more alive, like is what we've mentioned before.
And that's another aspect of it. The fact that it's not written, actually one of my Rebbeim told me this, the fact that it's not written, it allows you to be flexible in its interpretation.
Don't take that the wrong way.
Don't take that the wrong way. Let me explain what I mean. Yeah, before you turn off the podcast right now. Oh, okay, that's it. No. Listen for a second. Stay with me. As we've said a million times, there's different circumstances and scenarios that come up throughout history, and something that we think is true, we can find that a few years later is not. Right? And if the Torah is written down that every single scenario is in a certain way, when reality shifts, the Torah is done.
Right.
So what the Torah...
Which some people, if some people, atheist, secularists, they claim that that's already taken place.
But we know that that's not true.
Correct.
Because with every new scientific discovery, we say, oh, that's this aspect of the Torah. That's that aspect of the Torah. And people can argue about it because we're not sure exactly which one it is.
But that you leave up to the big minds to decide.
Or whoever it is, if we're the big minds, whatever it is, but it's a discussion. It's something that's taking place, and it's all connected to what happened previously. Oh, so why didn't the Torah just write everything and predict the future? The Torah is not going to drop the bomb of AI on the people in the desert in the year 2040-48. Not going to... Because you can't... Somebody who has a wheel, you can't all of a sudden tell them that they're robots that are going to look like humans. And how that's going to work. It's just, I don't even think this is not even something which you have to, have a Torah knowledge to say. The Torah is not just going to write every single scenario in it. Even though, obviously we believe God had the knowledge of all time and all generations, and if he wanted to, he could write every single scenario that ever happened.
Which he did. He just did it in a way
all in code.
All in code.
God was not going to give it to us on a silver platter because your mind can't handle it. Your mind can't handle 3,000 years of technology. As much as we think the world is going to advance in 3,000 years, trust me, 3,000 years ago they did not picture flying buses.
We don't have flying buses.
They're called airplanes.
Oh. Say, other than the flying, the magic
they couldn't
school
picture
bus.
flying. They couldn't fly.
We don't have
Which was
flying
awesome.
buses.
They couldn't picture flying. They couldn't picture a bus. They couldn't picture a motor. Like they couldn't picture anything. What did they picture?
Nanotechnology.
Oh, we'll have a much bigger wagon. Like I'm saying, like maybe we'll have different types of peaches. Like I'm saying, like they could. That's what they were focused on back then, because that's where their minds allowed them to go.
Better plows.
We have no idea what's going to be in 3,000 years from now. So God's not going to put that all in the book. So by
it's much more expansive if it stays oral.
And it allows us to adapt with the times. Again, not to take it the wrong way. You never drop a mitzvah. It's not telling you the mitzvahs are not applicable. The mitzvahs are to stay. But it's that if a reality changes, we can now adapt to that reality. How do we need to look at it?
Right, we can go back to the book and figure out where in the book this is where can I find this concept that I can break down the details of this particular new item and figure out what its basic components are, and realize where those can be found.
Yeah,
which is why I personally have a great time reading through New Age Shilohs and Chuvos, question and answer books.
Reading the Chuvos of Moshe Feinstein is like awesome.
It's so gold because it's like essentially that's what he does. He breaks any question they get. Rabbi Ovadia did the same basic thing in a very what I find to be a very incredible fashion. Really, but they all do it. It's all the same basic idea. You take the question, right? You break it down to its most basic components. Let's say with things in electricity or things in like dietary questions. What is this new thing that they've found? Turkey. They didn't have turkey back in the day. They had to find out whether or not that was legit. But you basically break it down. The bird,
not the country. Just to be clear.
Right. They had turkey back in the day. The Ottoman Empire was large. It was huge.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, they break it down to its most basic components, figure out what are making these basic components tick, how is this thing working on its most basic level, and then find out where those ideas are found.
Right.
It's very, very ingenious. Ingenious? Is that the way to say ingenuity in its noun form?
I guess so. I never thought of it that way.
Ingenuine?
No, ingenious. Ingenious.
Ingenious?
Yeah, I guess so. I never thought of it connected to ingenuity, but it probably is. Ingenious.
It's very ingenious.
Okay, so with all the information that we've given over the past however much time,
it's almost dumb now to ask, just so you know, this was my original question.
But we want to speak it out because it's important to know how the questions against the Oral Torah are articulated.
Right.
But hopefully by the time we finish asking this question, you guys will already have the answer, 5 answers in your head.
Right. So the question we started off with, which now we're getting to at the end, because
that's how the magic of podcasts is.
We're Yodaing this podcast right now. Doing it backwards. Oh, you're not a Star Wars fan.
I know about Yoda. Come on.
Okay, but the question, and for anyone who may know Sam Harris poses this question in one of his books. I think Waking Up, maybe. And he poses it also on a lot of his podcasts or his debates, where he's like, there's nothing special about the oral tradition because it's basically interpretation, meaning that anyone can walk into a bookstore, pick out a book, and read into the book many beautiful insights, deep and moral insights. So there's nothing special about anyone picking up the Bible and reading in whatever you want to read in.
He gives an example of going into a bookstore and picking out a book.
Right, and then he goes even further and says, even if you don't want to necessarily, even if you'll say, okay, well, it just feels weird to do that with a cookbook, even though his proof to doing it is he actually does it with a cookbook. So even if you'll say, okay, well, we can start a religion based on Shakespeare. I can open Shakespeare and read into it extreme, very moral and a whole moral code of being and being in the world, and we're going to start a religion on that. So his point is even the Bible in its written form is not even the best. It's not even a very well written book. It's not even a great book to do it on. I mean, so if you've listened to the majority of this podcast, obviously now it's not a very good question because there's a lot more there than just. Obviously, there's a lot more there than a moral way of living your daily life. It's the laws are literally endless. Any case you can bring in front of a competent scholar, and he can give you a.
You can't just look at it as a morality book. It's
right.
I look at it as an academic work. You'll see the brilliance behind it. See how the systems that they had in place in those days are really our modern legal systems all trace themselves back to the Talmud. It's the oldest. Yeah. It's the oldest legal codex I think that we have in world history. So it's all based off of that. In terms of a religious thing, we've shown how it all originated from Moshe. Everyone attributes everything back to Moshe. And the process was just repeated over and over and over again until we get to where we are nowadays. Part of his argument is obviously that he doesn't believe in revelation of God, and part of our discussion was how ultimately that is where it comes from. But if you believe in the Bible itself, the ultimate answer I think is the Bible itself does not function without an oral Torah. Forget reading meaning into the Bible. You can't function with just the Bible.
It's completely non-functional.
At all. You have no idea what to do. There are certain things you can figure it out to do. Bris Milah.
Or like the famous ones, that they always bring, to do good onto your, or whatever.
Yeah, do good onto your neighbor.
It's
much easier. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your friend like yourself. Which is also a big discussion.
But another point, though, that really gets under my skin with these type of things is like... Right, so obviously the Bible itself is written in ancient Hebrew, right? The Talmud is written in a mix between ancient Hebrew and ancient Aramaic, right?
Yeah.
The points can be a little different from the Talmud. My points can be a little different from the Talmud to the Bible, but the point is the same. That again, if I were to walk into an physicist's lair or wherever they figure out what
his cave,
wherever they figure out what they're figuring out, right? And I started
poking around
or disagreeing with him on certain points of theories or works that he's developed. He'd be like, so you've read my book in that's been translated or whatever, but you don't know the math behind it. You don't know You don't even know the language that it's written in. What gives you the right to think that you can now come and make a valid point,
right?
Without knowing what the words actually mean,
right?
Meaning, like people nowadays, they'll get on stage and give a whole irreligious presentation, which may sound great and be very smart and intellectual, but then you could just look at the guy and be like, all this means nothing because you have no idea what the word actually means, any of them. Which to me is a big deal. You know what I'm saying? If you have doubts and you have or points which you think are nonsensical or whatnot, don't think that your idea is a very good idea until you figure out, at the very least, what the words actually mean so that you can read it to know.
And how could you translate the Torah if you don't speak Hebrew? The people who translated the Bible, they spoke Hebrew. And they put in that. But don't come and just assume that it means the same thing, because it doesn't. Because first of all, it's translated, and you don't speak Hebrew, so you can't translate it yourself. And this is really an important point for our entire series, because just taking all the academics and all the really smart people out of it, just take a regular person on the street who just dismisses something out of hand from the Torah. Perhaps the biggest proof to the Jewish people is that we've been doing this longer than anybody, and overall we're the smartest collective people. The most has come out of, and the most has come out of the Jewish people. So to just come and say it's ridiculous because it doesn't make sense to you, it's not a faith. It's not just a faith-based religion. It's not just coming out of nowhere. We have millennia of information that has been poured over by many people who were totally not biased. They were ready to trust me. Some of the arguments you see between some of these different commentaries throughout the different eras that we spoke about are vicious. They went at each other big time, and sometimes it actually spilled over into real life. For the most part, it was just
meaning physical real life.
For the most part, it was just in the world of academia.
Of thought and academia, right.
But sometimes it became so strong. The philosophies became so strong that it spilled over into the real world, outside the walls of the Beis Medrash. But there's a lot of stuff that's going on over here. I just say stuff, but there's a lot of stuff that's going on over here.
Yeah, I mean the to use a Jewish word here, because we are two Jews sitting in the back of the Beis.
Back of the Beis.
The chutzpah, you know what I'm saying? The chutzpah to even have, meaning it sounds pretty harsh what I'm saying, and I don't mean that people shouldn't think and discuss and have questions.
Oh, we
and
love
talk
questions.
For sure, but to think that I have a definitive opinion on something that I can't even read is ridiculous.
Yeah.
If I were to go to Sam Harris, who is a neuroscientist, and start telling him things that I think about neuroscience, he'd be like, do you know math? Do you know biology? Like, what exactly are you saying? What do you know?
We don't want to just bash on
anything.
Sam Harris over here. Like, we're talking about, like,
Sam
in general.
a lot. No, I really do. I think Sam is extremely
it's not
smart.
not about an actual argument, not about you liking or disliking him. Just saying the concept is like we're not just arguing on a specific person or anything, but it's the biggest names. It's the regular people on the street,
right?
Who listen to one Torah lecture and just say, okay, this is ridiculous. Like you actually study this. It makes sense.
Don't pass judgment until you can read the words.
I once heard a class from Rabbi David Orlovsky, who's famous for being funny, but he should also be famous for being a tremendous Torah scholar. And one of the lines that he says is that Jews have been accused of many things throughout the centuries. Being stupid was never one of them.
No, it wasn't.
So,
by the way, Sam Harris is Jewish.
Yes, he is. So he'll eventually be on our side.
I don't know who's going to listen to this podcast, if anyone's going to listen to it. But whoever's out there, I've tweeted Sam Harris multiple times to try and get Rabbi Tatz on his podcast, because they've both written books on free will and whatnot. Rabbi Tatz also has a vast background.
Rabbi Dr. Akiva Tatz.
Yeah, he has a vast background in secular knowledge. He is a physician, well-known physician.
He's written books on
medicine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's well-versed in secular knowledge as well. And I think it would be super interesting to get those two. Personally, and again, I'm a huge fan of Sam Harris. I listen to him a lot, and I agree with basically everything he says not on religion. And even some points on religion that he says I agree with. I just don't agree with how he gets to his conclusions. But when I listen to it, I'm like, you're actually right. You're proving me right. You just don't know enough information to know that you're proving us right. But I think Rabbi Tatz would wipe the floor with him.
That would be fun. It would be fun to see. It's always just fun to see two smart people talk about
good minds, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
All right, well, if you listen to the end of this podcast, congratulations.
This may be our first, this may be our second.
But it's happening.
Stay tuned.
It's happening. Ways to reach us. We have a name, as we said, Back of the Beis. So please reach us at Gmail.
Back of the Beis podcast.
Back of the Beis at gmail.com. Beis is spelled B-E-I-S. Some people out there want to say B-A-I-S, but no, we're B-E-I-S. So Back of the Beis at gmail.com.
Back of the, if you can't spell it, well.
We're both on Facebook, Yehuda Rabinowitz and Yosef Siegel.
I have no friends on Facebook, so if you find me on Facebook, friend me. I probably won't friend you back because I don't check very often, but I'll have our editor check it.
Thank you.
No, I mean I'll have like our team.
Our team of people.
Yeah,
working furiously behind the scenes.
Furiously. I'd like to thank Josh and Pixie on the lighting.
And the Prophets. We have to thank the Prophets. Prophets, we switched our location for this podcast, but you should still be able to find us. Yeah, you should still be able to find us. We are here for the Prophets. We want the Prophets to come and visit us.
Come visit us so we can
just talk about stuff.
Yeah, and
we just want to know stuff.
Smoke a doobie.
Some of us want to do that. Some of us just want to know stuff. Just do things with the Prophets.
We'll leave you out of the doobie section.
Thank you. I'm on Twitter at Kumsitzguy. KUMZITZGUY at Comes It's Guy. Yehuda Rabin's on Twitter as well, apparently.
I'm too cool for Twitter, and also I don't like Twitter's.
But you just
how
said you
they
tweet
attack.
Sam Harris.
I used to.
Oh, okay. So
Back
he's
in the
not
day.
on Twitter.
No, because I don't like how Twitter silences the certain voices of conservatives. And
Yeah.
I'm not a hardcore conservative, but still,
You shouldn't
that's
sign out. No silence. Silence the hate, but not opinions.
don't even silence the hate. Let
That's
it
true.
flow,
Let the
man.
hate go. I mean, that's the point of the internet, right?
Yeah, well,
Right?
good will prevail. We will crush the hate with reason.
Amen.
Yeah,
That's how it is.
crush hate.
Anyway, this is an exhausting experience for us as well as you. So we're gonna sign off till next time.
Yo, keep the discussions flowing in the back of the base, gentlemen.
Always.
Just don't get kicked out of school.
Hope you had fun. Till next time. Oh, okay. Now I see where this is coming from. Is she gonna break up the band?
No, it's all leave it up to the girlfriend to break up the band.
She's gonna break up the band. We just got an awesome name and everything. Now
Yeah,
she's
back
gonna
in the
go
base.
break
Not
up
only
the
that, we're literally in the back
band.
of the base.
In the back of a base. We
I
have
love those
every week. We
sweaters.
have, huh?
Sweaters with thumb things.
What is this for?
It's for the thumb, like you're doing.
I know, but like, what? Why do I need my thumb like this?
Just keep your hands cool.
It doesn't keep my hands warm.
But it's cool.
It might be, but it's ridiculous.
It's like every time those things just more. They sell more holes. They sell it to you for more expensive.
Right, exactly. I just don't
I
know.
want my jeans with more holes in them, please.
See that? Should keep that. That's gold.
That's every time they're gold, right?
I'm gonna keep that clip and put it at the end.